Well, obviously, it's just remarkable to be here and to see your faces. It's really what I wanted. I just wanted to see your faces in the worst way, and to look out here and see your faces is more than I can express. So we'll begin with that. You know, some of you here, just for fun, and if you don't mind, because I kind of invoke people and I invoke situations, and just so the people around you have an idea, if you wouldn't mind, how many people here, you know, were Gill students from the unit school period? Would you just raise your hand, so those who, you know, so you have an idea, right? Okay, you know, where we all are. So how many are faculty people? Just faculty people, right? So you have an idea. So you have an idea of that. How many people are graduates of Gill, maybe who weren't in the unit period? Are there anybody here who? You're welcome. Don't be scared. Don't be scared of us, although maybe, huh? But anyway, so I'm just so excited, right, to be here, and it gave me an opportunity to say some things that I've really been wanting to say. And I think I need to begin by saying how beautiful your campus is, and how, you know, going through the halls, seeing what a remarkable educational system you have here right now, and how, if it came from a past, we hope, of course, that it does in part, but it's just functioning so beautifully. So congratulations on that. It was just for the heart, so thank you that. Well, so all right, so here I've been talking to you for about a week and a half now, actually, which you don't know, but every teacher has a story. And the idea for teaching starts somewhere, and it catches fire. And it begins to drive them into loving learning and loving sharing it, and into loving their fellow travelers, their colleagues, and certainly their students. Fire is the right word, because the heat of discovering what we need to do in our world, in our lives, is incredibly exciting. Some people, lucky enough to hit on the right career, call it getting a calling. And some people fall into their life's work by chance, and discover once into it that this is what they need to do. So in this room today, for every teacher in the room, past and present, there is a story waiting to be told or waiting to be shared about why they became a teacher and how it went when they did. But I'm here today privileged to be so, really privileged to be so. So let me tell you my story, and how and what, even now, it has to do with Gill St. Bernard's and its amazing students, and I chose those words carefully. I have been incredibly lucky. My life has been an impossible and unpredictable zigzag. In the beginning, because I was following my husband's career path, he's right here today, but at the heart of it, whether I've been a young mother of 3, landing with my husband in a New York suburb, writing children's books in my attic, or buried in the jungle of publishing in New York City, at the heart of my life has been teaching. Sometimes on a good day, I suspect it's a calling. I started my life as a teacher, ironically, as a journalist in Kentucky. My first job was as a reporter at the Louisville Courier-Journal. I was green as grass. The editors thought I was sweet and young and probably amusing, and sent me off on stories no one else wanted. It's very simple, that's the way it goes, right? With a camera that was far too big for me. Stories like my first one, hiking 60 miles to Abraham Lincoln's birthplace with a group of Girl Scouts, which Ronald had to save me from because they gave me the assignment so quickly I had no clothes. I just had a light shirt and it went down below 0, so he had to meet me in Kentucky with a shirt and a sweater, and the 2 of us slept in the back seat of a car, right, buddy? That's what we did. So I got to interview a few famous people that came into town, like Arnold Toynbee, the famous historian. And Sputnik was set into orbit when I was at the Courier, and I got to interview people on the street about whether they thought we'd get to the moon or not. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Interestingly enough, Sue, you can correct me, but I think the great Gill teacher, Sue Ely, was probably in Kentucky at the same time that I was, just out of college, volunteering as a midwife's assistant in the back hills of that great state, right? I think we overlapped. Go figure. Yeah. But at the Courier, it was a little guy with a plaid jacket, hair sticking out every which way, who often came down the halls to see the feature editor, who intrigued me. His name is Jesse Stewart. a Thomas Edison-like guy in size and shape who got famous writing a book called Taps for Private Tussey about a Kentucky hillbilly who went to war and came back to the Kentucky hills, but who also, I soon discovered, wrote a book called The Thread That Runs So True. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little. One of my stories for the Courier as a reporter was in a classroom, 5th grade probably, and just walking in that classroom blew my mind. And I forget what the assignment was, but the moment I won't forget. The smells of pencil and paper and books, the kids, their incredible ideas, spontaneous humor, their enthusiasm. And I knew suddenly that journalism or not, I had to go back to the classroom. And so I started to do that. The 60s were an odd time, as many of you know. Folk singers were taking roost everywhere. People were protesting the Vietnam War and everything else in the streets and parks and the offices of college presidents. A whole bunch were having their Woodstocks, expressing themselves in more ways than we could ever imagine. Either we were there or the pictures of it are still in our minds. Protest almost became the Fifth Estate over integration, women's rights, certainly over the war. It was true of education as well. So educators are always looking for new forms, and they were looking again during the 60s and early 70s. For the first time, you heard words like open classroom. That was probably in the 60s. And people were writing books like Summer Hill about an English school that gave its students almost complete freedom and the privilege of using their world as their classroom, creating their own schedules and programs. I took my first education course at Wayne State University in Detroit shortly after Ron got out of the Army, which is why I had been in Kentucky in the first place, by the way. And I got a good dose of some of those new educational ideas. But it was the book of that country boy, assigned by some professor whose name I've long forgotten, that suddenly woke me up to how I wanted to teach, new forms or not. That book, The Thread That Runs So True, by Jessie Stewart, the same hayseed writer that had wandered the hills of the Courier-Journal. Thrown into a run-room schoolhouse in the hills of Kentucky at the age of 17 to teach country kids from 6 to 26 in one classroom, kids used to working hard on farms and running barefoot and fancy-free when they couldn't. I get an accent when I talk about Kentucky. I don't mean to, so if you hear it, it's not that I'm from Kentucky. I'm from Michigan. Anyway, but surefire, darn, bullheaded, Tom Sawyer, creative, strong, independent kids. Barely out of school himself, Stewart had never taught, but they needed a teacher, and he was there, bright and handy. Well, his first days were not easy by any reckoning. Those kids didn't want to be in that school, no way. And he needed to learn how to teach and quick in order to survive. But how? Well, it was something of a miracle, I suppose. Hard days for him were passing by with no answers until one day, watching and hearing those same wild kids out in the schoolyard playing a game, he heard them exuberantly chanting, "The needle's eye that does supply the thread that runs so true. I stump my toe, and down I go, all for the want of you." It was their exuberance that set him paying attention, to listening and watching, and suddenly he found himself asking if the chant had something to say to him as a teacher, maybe something important. And then he began to see it clear, the needle's eye that does supply, or the needle was the teacher supplying the idea, or the thought, or the plan. The thread that runs so true was the kids. Kids would run true all right, even when they were learning, if the teacher did it right. And the very game, it was becoming clearer and clearer to him, was part of the secret to this. Play itself was part of the secret. Could kids also work by play? Could they learn by play? So the idea of playing and teaching, even at the beginning, was too simplistic for Stewart, too easy. But it gave him permission to think outside of the teaching box. Look at how free they were outside in their own world, exuberant. Okay, then for starters, he'd go to their worlds to meet them at least halfway. And he'd go with the spirit of gamemanship, of play. So no sitting in tight little rows and tight little seats then. He'd go into their acres of corn to measure. He'd go to the truck bed of dirt to figure the amount of dirt a truck bed would hold. To the daffodils in the fields to read Wordsworth and to write. He'd go wherever he needed to go to teach his lessons, no question. He needed to engage those kids, and he did. Before he knew it, even during the time inside the one-room schoolhouse, at the stiff-back desks, the kids were more engaged, full of good humor and discovered intelligence and spirit. They simply trusted the whole situation, including him. So any teacher, many of the best in this room today, past and present, knows there are ideas and facts and history and literature that need to be learned and memorized and stored. Numbers and equations and formulas too. There are limitations to play. There are even limitations to using a student's environment. But the principles of play and gamemanship, competition, sharing, teammanship, that engage mental and physical acuity, quick reaction, curiosity, a respect for serendipity and originality, and the byproducts of play that create an environment where that enthusiasm, good humor, passion for succeeding, adjustment for losing could live. You know how coincidences are. Well, Ron got out of the Army, and we ended up in White Plains, New York, near New York City, where even though I was writing children's books, I had grown more and more intrigued with teaching. I went back to Manhattanville College in Purchase, New York, still the 60s, at a time when people there, Robert Fine, I recall, were saying some of the same things as Jesse Stewart. Look at your world. Use it to teach your lessons. Don't lecture all the time, and use inductive reasoning where the kids themselves can pluck at facts and conclude from them what they themselves have discovered. I remember a lesson on ethnocentricity where Fine sketched out 6 or 7 countries on the board, somewhat mysteriously. We didn't know what he was doing. Each time scrawling the name of the country and the traits of its culture beneath it, admitting that each savored their own cultures almost one-mindedly above all others, and then drawing a circle around each country proclaiming ethnocentricity. And I understood. Hey, I was beginning to digest Jesse Stewart. I also understood what he was doing, showing us a thinking process, showing us how to derive what our own tactile, visual evidence showed us, leading us to conclude. At the time, Manhattanville's sister Ruth Dowd had opened the Harlem Prep School in storefront space, using the world of Harlem, the streets, the parks, the objects, the practical needs of her students to teach the gifted kids there who, trapped by their own economic prisons, were getting lost in traditional classrooms. People just looking in new places and new ways to teach and to learn, and somehow respecting not only the facts of learning, but the texture and the environment of learning. Anyone who has ever read Mary Bateson's book, Composing a Life, knows that she believes women of my generation improvised their lives. The men went where they needed to go to have their careers: Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas, New York. The women followed. Make no mistake, though, these women were working on themselves too, working to become who they were, no matter where they ended up, improvising, maybe listening to, or for their call, listening to or for their calling. I had just finished my master's degree in education at Manhattanville when once again we moved, this time to Basking Ridge. Once again I needed to improvise. What exactly would I do here in this new place where I didn't know anyone, not even the streets of this semi-rural village? The one thing I carried with me from White Plains were ideas, not only about literature and all that involves, but about what education was or could be. When I saw a small article in the Bernardsville News about a school in Gladstone, New Jersey, the Gill St. Bernard School, that was going to create a whole new kind of program in its upper school. It was called the Unit Plan. It intended to use its own gifted teachers, but look to the community as well, to see if there were some experts out there too that could teach. Its philosophy: the world is our classroom. Bingo. Talk about coincidence. Let's get one thing straight. Everybody in this room knows this. Teaching is not easy. Any teacher in this room knows that teaching is not easy. Having published a children's book or two and looking something like an outside expert, I got the job teaching some English courses in creative writing at Gill from headmaster Jack Wright. But now thrown into the classroom with 8 to 15 teen strangers who were, well, take a look at me. skeptical, right? Suspicious, slightly mischievous, and definitely wondering who on earth I was. And remember, I was short even then. But before I walked into Founders in this little story, in this my story, a building which everyone here knows well, let's talk about the upper school Gill kid of the early 70s. It occurred to me, you may not call the Gill kid anymore. I call the Gill kids the Gill kids. Do you call them the Gill kids? Susie, do you, Rosie, call them the Gill kids? I don't never say Gill St. Bernard's kids, they're the Gill kids. Well, there we go. Because how can you talk about teaching without talking about the kid, right? Maybe because of the imaginative curriculum. The school was attracting the brightest, most wonderfully offbeat kid right from the start. This kid had probably been going as his or her own way or trying to in some traditional setting since the time he was 5, maybe younger. The kid had a lot of confidence, a lot of sass, maybe even a little swagger when he or she needed it. But this kid, this Gill kid, was used to dreaming at the edges, used to looking not just at the thing, but the aura of the thing. Not just at the idea, but the idea of the idea. Sometimes these kids actually photograph the aura. Scott, you remember Mark Villan? Photographing auras. Sometimes they argued the idea of the idea, exploding into debate with their fellows in seminars, blessed seminars, long the mainstay of education at Gill, English and history courses, or with their teachers' office before school even began, just to disagree. They were always waiting for me. I figured maybe everybody felt that way. Brad Blackford and Steve Sussman came to mind. And artists, a lot of the Gill kids were artists, fine artists, who preferred to describe their world with a pencil or a brush or torn paper rather than words. And musicians who carried their song or their guitars with them. Are you here, Chris Burt? Do you still play? A lot of them were, and I know this sounds impossible, everything. I got to read that sentence again. A lot of them were, and I know it sounds impossible, everything. Engaged in art and words and athletics and everything the world had to offer. They had multiple talents. They were into tasting life, into celebrating it. There was a spirit in them which I cannot fully explain even now. Even today, I meet a kid or a young adult and I recognize him or her by the spark in their eye, by their sheer difference, their individuality, their confidence and intelligence, their artistry, by their willingness to go the road less traveled, a way overused poem by Frost, but even so, just right for the Gill kid. Hey, Ron, I say, that kid we just met, is that a Gill kid or what? Right? If I say it, he knows just what I mean. Right, Ronnie? And the teachers, ironically, not every teacher grown was in their bones a Gill kid. Not all of us were as gutsy as our own students, as courageous. Not all of us thought out of the box as regularly as the kids themselves. But we were to the last teacher, and I'm going to guess this is so here, even today, we were game. So a lot of us came close. Gill attracted Roger Kavanaugh, who regularly taught Egyptian history at a time when who was even thinking of Egypt? He believed in energy that we could not see, but which a pyramid in his own apartment could capture. And lucky us, we have someone in this room today who has sat in one of those pyramids. Am I right, Scott?
Slept overnight.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. Right? Trust me. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. Sueli, a horsewoman, an athlete, poet, lover, and brilliant practitioner of words, Wellesley graduate whose mind was an encyclopedia of literature and whose brilliance showed in everything she said and taught. You can imagine a trip, it's true. It's true. You can imagine a trip to Greece for a Greek literature course with someone like Sueli. Rosemary Hardin, originally from Oklahoma, whose broad smile and hearty laugh and sheer intelligence charmed everyone around her as she tackled her favorite subjects like European history, but also Native American studies, the literature of the world's women, or Peter Schmidt, who was a Quaker in his heart, who grew up during the Vietnam War and whose pacifist values brought him to the streets in protest and brought him into the Gill world where he knew his colleagues shared his passion for learning and living courageously and in peace. Mike Chimes, Pauline Lurie, Jerry Cirillo, Jerry Citrullo, Phil Kaufman, John Burt, John Menke, and so many more. And you must forgive me for not remembering and speaking the name and story of every single one. Not only did we believe that the world was our classroom, which truly was the school's mantra, but each of us created and sought our own world. Each classroom is different from each other, as the school's classrooms were from traditional classrooms. And here's what was truly unique for me. We, all of us, as different as we were, had time. We had time to create those classrooms, to teach in the amazingly individual ways and places that came to represent the unit plan. So let me just pause on that. In my mind, this is probably the biggest distinction in the unit plan among educational forms even now. Time. You know, time for something as self-evidently important as beginning, middle, and end to an assignment or a program or a project. Time for immersion in a subject. Time for research. Time to go somewhere to reinforce an idea, whatever its shape. The needle's eye that does supply. The thread that runs so true. Well, the needle's eye is served well by the elements of play and texture and the world as classroom, giving multi-layered dimensions to the teacher's teaching, but is particularly well served simply by having enough time. So a course like British and American literature was 7 weeks long, from roughly 8:30 to 2:30 each day. Time, not interrupted by a bell, not squeezed in between disparate subjects, not eliminated for an assembly, not usually anyway. Thread that runs so true, time for teaching kids in a way that invited them in. So those of you who are hearing this for the first time, I'm not sure, are you worried that core courses were not taught? Are you worried how kids in those days could pass the New York's Regents test if they had to, or their SATs with high enough grades? We were well aware, the faculty. We taught those core courses. We taught them, believing fully in the life-changing material that was in them. After all, this was a private preparatory school whose students needed to get into colleges and universities, fine ones. We brought our backpack of ideas, our individuality, our imagination, our gamemanship to the design of core courses. But we brought the same to the courses we designed individually. I've been working with novelists for the last 20 years in publishing, and I can tell you that a novelist who chooses a novel that he or she writes, driven by their own passions, has the best chance of writing a breakout novel with an original voice. Likewise, a teacher who is allowed to create a course that comes from what she or he knows and believes and feels driven to share will teach an outstanding, maybe unforgettable course. Is that not true even now? And so our passions drove each of us in our own way to invent different and imaginative learning in core courses, as well as to invent our own particular courses driven by what we loved. No question, there was a one-mindedness that created both. And did I say that we, this faculty, this band of believers, learned as well as taught? Well, it's true, right? The expansive environment, the depth of devotion and study, the textured curricula, the dedication made possible by time, made learning possible for us too, at every turn. So how did all this work in the classroom? Some of you in this room know well. You know, sometimes I have a little trouble figuring out exactly which was your class, but not always. I think I'm about 90% right, although maybe I can't give the right title of one of them. But in any event, when I want to go back to a basic principle of play, which is to teammanship. The unit plan created teams of each class, not deliberately. That was not, I don't think, in the curriculum. It just happened. So living together in a round of seats for 7 weeks, the kids became, as it were, teams or families, or for some reason, the term merry bands comes to mind. I must have been reading Robin Hood. In any event, but make no mistake, the kids didn't always agree. Do families? They squabbled. Do families? But in class after class, they hung together in good times and not, through hard lessons and revelations in a way that only the word together can describe, almost always with wit and immense good humor. Oh, they made me laugh. It happened over and over, this coming together. And I remember well the so-called adjusted English class, wherever they got that name, where so close were the kids to each other that the kids decided everyone in class was Fred. Do you remember this? So we would hurry across campus to lunch or chapel or the museum with voices calling out, "Hey, Fred! Hi, Fred!" You know, go figure. Yes, even me, I wasn't Mrs. Gouch or even Mrs. Grouch, which happened now and then, but collecting my email, it was "Morning, Fred." So what a team, what a family, what an environment for living and learning. In their brand of independence and love of freedom, many of our students actually and stubbornly fought reading. Some also fought writing papers of any kind. Writing and reading always primary goals of school, and certainly of Gill in those days as it is now. Hi, John. I didn't see you sneak in, but there he is. But here once again is where time came in. And I realized I cannot speak for math and science, only the humanities, English in particular. It was a little different for them, right? Chris, you probably know that. Because we had the time to immerse ourselves in whatever we were reading, we had amazing choice. Over a week or so, we could tackle Catcher in the Rye, or Slaughterhouse-Five, or Franny and Zoe, or Farewell to Arms, or Wuthering Heights, big book, right? Without interruption. The book could absolutely occupy our daytime minds and our world. In our seminars, we could talk about the book in wonderful particularities, discover character and characterization, hear voices, unearth metaphors, make connections. The seminar was an intimate stage, really, an intellectual playground, at times battleground for ideas. And since there were only 15 people in most classrooms, that meant something round, something egalitarian. No lecture with the teacher parading in front of the 15 students, regaling them with his or her backpack of facts. Though a fine lecture is a beautiful thing, the seminar allowed us to create an opportunity for learning that was not only interactive but whole, intriguing. What did you like about that chapter in The Red Pony? Personal. Give me a name or a moment and defend why in your eyes it was outstanding. Specific. How exactly did the weather reflect Jody's emotional mood when he was drawn to the barn? And intellectually exciting, how did the death of the pony change Jody's entire life perspective, or did it? It was almost like a game. Frequently, one of the students would lead the seminar. No one ever refused that I remember. I recall Laura Seidel, NPR's Laura Seidel, leading many seminars. She just got better and better. And Julie, I think you led seminars. Julie, Rebe led seminar. Anybody else in the room lead a seminar? Did you lead? Did you?
That's right.
Yeah, I think. All right. You know, yeah, I gotcha. All right. So it was a big deal. You know, it was also a game to play teacher. And we're talking about, you know, this spirit, this spirit that let you share, that let you try new things. In one of my first British Lit classes, I was blessed with the most hardy individuals you could imagine, a merry band of them, each with totally different things on their mind. They probably were not all that thrilled to even be there, friendly seminar circle or not, particularly on those warm autumn days when the smell of fall leaves drifted in the open windows and Junie wasn't outside mowing the lawn. I knew I needed to select a book that they could love, absolutely love. So I picked one that I loved, arguably the best place to start. It was called Killer Angels, the Pulitzer Prize winner by Ken Shara, historical fiction about the three-day Battle of Gettysburg. 374 pages. I had a lot of nerve, didn't I? Because we had time. We would read it in patches over 2 weeks, living each battle through the expressive and powerful words of Shara. The 15 kids would learn literary techniques, points of view, Chamberlain's, Pickett's, Longstreet's, Lee's. They would learn about historical research for such a book. They would learn about the narrative movement in a great story and what and how a turning point is crucial, is created. They would particularly learn about developing character. It's just a great book for developing character. They would begin to love to read. That was my plan. You know, wasn't I the needle? I figured I needed to get them into that 1860s world to be able to touch the story, to be touched by the story. I always figured that when more than one sense was involved, they'd remember. I figured that if the decisions were theirs, they'd remember. If they could be brought to the battlefield by the words of Shara, they'd remember. Choose a dimensional project then. Seminars in the morning, we'd work on projects afternoons. I remember those afternoons, the bustle of the classroom, everybody working on something with whole hearts. Though each student had his or her own, I don't remember every project. I do remember that I felt their passion when a giant Gettysburg map was created and spread out on a table that occupied the entire center of the room, cluttering it up. Right? I remember the battlegrounds coming alive each day under Shara's words and their hands. The Battle of Cemetery Ridge, the Peach Field, Little Round Top. But it was also matching activities to the talents. Houston Ripley was one of those everything people. A serious baseball player that was the love of his life at this time and walking into that classroom, and an artist with considerable talents. What could he do that reading the book would bring to life? He sculpted, in the end, a life-size head of General Longstreet. And I saw Longstreet for the first time when I saw Houston's splendid sculpture. Do you remember it? You do. Time. It set our teachers' imagination ranging, and to such a degree, giving us the space we needed to teach a lesson that we could hope would not be forgotten. Sometimes in memory, I miss classes up. I don't always put the right people in the right class together, but I know the thread that runs so true ran through another adjusted English class I taught. People in that class, 10th graders, I believe, were not at all sure they ever wanted to read a whole book. There was just too much else to be doing. You can imagine. I was unabashedly trying to win these kids to reading. So again, from what I loved, I chose a new young adult book by Robert Cormier called The Chocolate War. Is anybody in this room in that class, The Chocolate War? Marcia Harris has been in contact with me in the last year, but I'm not sure if any of you were. In any event, I loved it. Why wouldn't they? Sometimes at Gill, students would so love a book or a poem that their response was almost ecstatic. It might burst right out, their enthusiasm, right out of the classroom. And that's what happened to The Chocolate War. Their ideas burst right out of the classroom. It's a poignant story about Jerry, whose mother had died, and his father was growing more and more withdrawn. And he was in a new school facing a wicked administrator called Brother Leon and his teenage henchmen, Archie and the Vigils. Why? Because Jerry refuses to sell chocolates for their annual chocolate sale. Jerry puts up a sign in his locker to remind him that he had enough courage to resist all of them. The sign, "Do I dare disturb the universe?" And the chocolate war began. The ecstatic scene in this book never leaves me. Jerry is set to fight Yanza, a vigil, one of these teenage gang kids, climactically in front of the whole school. Commands as to which punch to throw are being called out by a neutral referee when the vigil, Yanza is his name, throws a low, unfair punch, and Jerry, unthinking, unleashes a barrage of low, unfair punches, pummeling Yanza bloody to the ground. Listen to this. Triumphantly, he watched Yanza floundering on wick-wobbly knees. Jerry turned toward the crowd, seeing what? Applause? They were booing him. Shaking his head, trying to reassemble himself, squinting, he saw Archie in the crowd, a grinning, exultant Archie. A new sickness invaded Jerry, the sickness of knowing what he had become. Another animal, another beast, another violent person in a violent world, inflicting damage, not disturbing the universe, but damaging it. He had allowed Archie and the Vigils and Brother Leon to do this to him. Unbeknownst to me, the kids in the classroom fired up, took a poster board, scrawled on it, "Do I dare disturb the universe?" and taped it up on a board next to the lunchroom fireplace. Well, surprise to me, and Peter remembers, the school began to answer it. Scrawl comments across the board. You have to disturb the universe in order for any kind of progress, don't you? Hey, not this cat. You know where all that'll lead you. Coward. Anything worthwhile takes a fight, and so on and so on. So I wish I could remember all the retorts, but I can tell you that suddenly the school had been engaged. The ideas going way beyond the classroom into their own world. And I can tell you, too, the kids who never gave books a moment gave that book time. And I'm going to guess went on giving books time. Weren't we teachers involved with a noble process? Weren't we on a journey to build people? Isn't Gill and every good school still on that journey? Well, I came to Gill as a writer and a teacher of creative writing. What a glorious class to have an entire day to spend on, and 3 weeks generally. Perhaps more than in any class, I had a basic idea that life too often went by kids. They didn't see enough, clearly enough, particularly the kid who wanted to write. So in those creative writing classes, I took the school's mantra very seriously. If the world was our classroom, we would go into the world to see, to touch, to hear, to feel, in the particular, and to write. So your poem was right? We ranged near, wandering through the once plowed fields by the school, looking for disparate images, butterflies and rusting Campbell soup cans, trout in the river and garbage thrown by the side, right? Images perfect for writing haiku. We went to the gym to experience choosing and being chosen into teams. What could be more emotionally charged for some, or not? And to play basketball, what could be more physically gratifying, or not? And to play basketball, what could be more of that? All to write poetry. It was that night's assignment where John Attow, athlete poet, wrote this. Fingers, a hummingbird's wings, nervous wands, leaving scattered trails of flailing arms. Coiled springs of gold can spin webs in needles' eyes. Shafts of sunlight warm and caress the flesh from within. There is no numbness in the relaxed fingertips of these spindles. All from a basketball game. We ranged far, too, to Cape May, to walk the boardwalk, and as Faulkner did in New Orleans, to listen and gather voices to introduce voice as a concept. We wrote the poetry of antiques at the creaky Victorian bed and breakfast where we stayed, including the Widow's Peak that looked out over a stormy sea. We wrote 42nd Street in Manhattan, looking again for disparate images, splashy billboards, tawdry marquee, the shabby habitants of the street, often ending up in green and flowering Bryant Park, where the park broke into national groups and national pastimes. Or walk down Fifth Avenue discovering the 3-story stacks of books in what was then Scribner's, the jewel glass figures of Steuben glass, the secret top floor, by invitation only, at Gucci, where students somehow discovered Picasso drawings decked the walls. We stopped and wrote the Picasso drawings. You can pause on that. How they got to the top floor of Gucci, which was closed off to the general public with an elevator that nobody could use, I can't tell you. All I know is I'm downstairs and all of a sudden they're saying, come up, look what we found. Exuberance. Definitely part of the learning game. I talked the head of the English department into letting me teach dramas literature as my special course. It was simple. I loved it. I felt as if it had something to do with life, and I was right. We came to face in those courses, not only with beautiful language, right, and beautiful sentiment, passion-driven words, characters that became archetypal in their classic stature, but face to face with ideas, like those of Shakespeare and Molière, of Ibsen and Strindberg, Bertolt Brecht's Mother Courage, his dramatic and powerful treatise against war, Bernard Shaw's Heartbreak House and Captain Shotover's monologue about old age comes particularly to mind. Ionesco's Rhinoceros is the play I don't think any of the course's students will forget, and maybe not Sue Ely, who was below me in the course. All right, you will understand in a moment. I'm glad she's smiling today. Anyway, certainly not I. The drama set in Paris, Parisians simply walking the street or sitting at cafes, when one day a rhinoceros storms down the street, and then on the next day another and another, until pairs, groups, and finally herds of them are stampeding down the streets of Paris, and now the evidence that it is human beings that are turning into rhinoceroses, into animals, horned, leathery, bereft of individuality or brain, and stampeding, mindless as a crowd, arriving at a last act where the audience sees even the protagonist growing a leathery hide, hooves, a horn. How to give the students a multi-dimensional experience for this powerful idea. How to drive them to understand it in their skin, at their heart, the violence and compulsion of mind control. The needle's eye that does supply, but what in this case to supply and how? A preface to the play led me to the famous Nazi propaganda film Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will. that showed the thousands and thousands and thousands of Germans marching robotically into a government square in the 1930s as one. Their legs, arms, tilt of hats, chins, mouth, identical, and shouting Heil Hitler as one impassioned voice to an Adolf Hitler standing smugly in a box above them all. Rhinoceroses. With that film still ringing in their ears, the kids, switching roles every so often so everyone could read, stepped into Ionesco's words robotically, becoming rhinoceroses. I still hear the pounding of their feet, their hooves vibrating more and more fiercely as the acts went on, driven by Ionesco's powerful words into becoming rhinoceroses, the fierce animal image of mind control and loss. How could you ever forget, with your legs, your arms, your feet, your body involved with these incredibly powerful words? How? I thought not. Well, whether the course is reading or writing or studying history or philosophy or geology or chemistry, the question consumes the teacher: how can I bring a book or poem or formula meaningfully to the student? Bring it to the well of who he or she is, and who's surprised that when a teacher in any kind of teaching plan is lucky enough to get it right, the students are exuberant. So is the teacher. They, after all, are the best, idea of how you did, of how the plan went, how the lesson went. There's no question. Am I right that every teacher in the room remembers those moments when he or she gets it right? Right? They could sit here and write a patch. There's this patch and this one, and do you remember the time? They can do this. Okay, in any event, so let me come back. Am I right then? I remember the rhinoceroses writing Picasso, the Do I Disturb the Universe poster, the serendipitous moment. And I remember Chris, I was thinking about this last night, when Chris Burt started to strum his guitar behind a class reading of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The play of shine and shade on the trees as the supple boughs wag, etc. You remember? It was the most incredible moment, I remember, and so much more. We teachers in the unit plan were just a little bit luckier than most because we had enough time. Maybe people were right to call the unit plan an experiment. Okay, it was an experiment, but an experiment that tested the waters of learning supported by our senses, our intellect, our love of learning, and the lessons of the game. An experiment that essentially tested whether, if teachers had enough time, would it give them greater opportunities to teach in a way that ideas and facts and lessons of the book and of humanity would not be forgotten. I don't believe there is only one way to teach, nor one way to learn. Jack Wright and Barclay Palmer after him hired people whose philosophies match theirs. We believed that the school was our classroom, and with this new kind of time on our side, we dreamed big. Is it dreamt big, Sue? Dreamt big. Either way, oh, I'm so glad. The brilliant and creative Sue Ely took her kids to Greece and Ireland, a rare thing in the early 80s, bringing to bear her poetic sensitivities and demand for articulate response. Peter Schmidt took his kids on inward journeys, taking kids into dimensions that don't fall easily into traditional courses: spirituality in America, race, class, and gender, as well as courses in U.S. history and modern China. And Jerry Citrullo, bless him, influenced by mythologist Joseph Campbell, regularly backpacked with his kids in the tangled woods around Gil St. Bernard's to introduce them to the hero's journey, his goal not only to discover the hero in myth and mythic literature, but the hero in themselves. And so it went, in classroom after classroom in the 70s and early 80s. When I have heard the No Child Left Behind criteria, I shudder. I have not read the whole booklet, but what I have heard, the emphasis on teaching to the test, on teaching a curricula that teachers not teaching have probably constructed, I have thought I must live on another planet. What's education all about? Is it only learning the technical skills to survive in an increasingly technical world? And I know how crucially important that is. I'm not naive. Is it only learning the shape of an expositional piece of writing? And I know how crucially important that is. The formula for a quantum equation, it might well be crucial to some. Learning great words, great ideas, numbers, formulas, facts, like everyone in this room, I know that more than ever human beings need and want to have these tools in his or her belt. basic cultural and technical information when they go out into the world and try to survive it. It's a complex world. But surely there is more. As a teacher, isn't education accompanying the student to a greater humanity as well? Taking time for it? To ideals constructed from experience and the wisdom, fiction and nonfiction, of those good books? To decision-making that comes from those ideals that will enable a human being to navigate and be resilient and take leadership in an increasingly complex world? George Sanders, author of The 10th of December, wrote in a New York Times article recently defending why, though famous, he's still taught. Even for those thousands of young people who don't get published, he wrote, the process is still a noble one. The process of trying to say something, of working through craft issues and worldview issues, and all of this is character building, and God forbid everything we do should have career results. God forbid that everything we do should be aimed at getting test results. Let our information and skills and book learning and loving these things be the tools in our belt for going forth. Demand them, but let their humanity be our goal. Let our humanity be the goal. I say that even now. The process is a noble one. When I left Gill, I took the lessons of Gill as well as my students on my back. You all probably didn't know that, but there you were. I took the belief in texture and looking at the small, into choosing which novels and picture books I would publish. Make no mistake, publishing is a private journey and has little of the joys of a Gill classroom, neither in the sense of humor nor the day-to-day artistry. But it allowed me to take what I believed into the world of publishing and choose books like Alumni, which Jan Schoenherr's father, John Schoenherr, illustrated, and which won a Caldecott Medal, and many beautiful books by Gill's Jan Schoenherr himself, who was always on the same page as I was, probably not surprisingly. It allowed me to choose manuscripts that cherished concrete and textured words, and that believed in the beauty and power of language. Having read all those novels at Gill, luxuriant in time, I came to publishing with a clear sense of narrative line and the power of great character, and was smart enough to publish books like Mockingbird by Catherine Erskine, which regarded the totally original human being as lovable and powerful in her own way, a book that won the National Book Award. Kathy Erskine would have made a great Gill kid. I am so glad so many of you could be here today. People I taught, people I wish I could have taught. I'm so sorry that I never got to teach some of you. I wish that everyone could be here today. Everyone from those years could be here today. When I hear where people are, in Colorado, in California, Seattle, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, NPR reporters, lawyers, therapists, professors, artists of every kind, of national advertisements, well-known picture books, book jackets, graphic presentations, gallery artists featured for their engraving-like mastery, jazz singers who also compose. Did you all know this? Creators of music productions, founders of holistic spas. I'm amazed. I wish I could hear everyone's stories. I hope with all my heart that all of them, all of you, came into your college and adult lives believing that learning was a good thing, that ideas were cherishable, that authors and artists like Sophocles and Homer, Moliere, Shakespeare, Blake, Poe, Wallace Stevens, D.H. Lawrence, Hemingway, Shara, Ionesco, all of them, could go on your journeys with you, did go on your journeys with you. There was room. I hoped there always would be room. It was a good idea, the Gill Unit Plan. It came from a good place, at a good time. It believed in the beginning and the middle and the end. It believed in the texture of the day. It believed in the capability and possibility of each human being and in their individuality. It attracted teachers with ideas and courage and immense love for their subject and their students, and enabled teachers to go wherever they needed to go to meet an idea halfway in order to give kids transcendent moments of learning. It gave them time. Shades of Jessie Stewart. There is only one place where I can end this talk. When I first came to Gill, it was the 70s, years that had their own stories. Years that had followed the 60s with all of its flower power and songs of freedom. But this was a school. At graduation during the 70s and early 80s, the undergraduate Gill kids climbed up on the rooftop of Founders. Anybody remember this? Yeah. Okay. I just loved it. It was, after all, another time, so I understand we don't need to do that anymore. But the graduates, often barefoot, many in different kinds of white dress, flowing or slim, with fresh flowers pinned in their hair. Yes, boys and girls both came down the chapel walk. They were ready. I know that, to break out and maybe throw programs up into the air in celebration of the next step. But for that moment, walking down the walk, there was a wonderful quiet. I remember that. There was a wonderful quiet. It was such a remarkably individual walk. The teachers, bless them all, bless us all, were filled with such pride in each of these kids. Everything about the moment said, watch out, world. These are kids with promise. Time has proven us right. I spent a lot of time today on the Gill of yesterday, but I don't doubt for a moment. I walked this campus today. I saw those walls. I don't doubt the individuality of Gill remains today. The love of learning, the creativity of teachers, the relationship between teachers and students, the willingness to see each person for what or who she is. Today, the last class of the year is a unit class in length, and I'm told in idea. Great. Would it be fair to say that the now of Gill St. Bernard's is still served mightily by original and wonderfully imaginative teachers and staff, with now and then a nod to its big experiment, the unit plan, its rich, somewhat amazing, and even courageous past? I love you all. I've come to say that. And I love this school. I thank you for letting me tell you how much. Thanks so much. Thank you.